Hello and welcome to Right Sports Talk. My name is Zach, and a couple weeks ago I made a video giving my sleeper teams in the NFL for this upcoming season. So I talked about teams that I thought would kind of do better than expected this upcoming season. Well, today I'm going to talk about kind of the opposite. That's teams that made the playoffs last season in the NFL that I think are going to kind of underperform this season, kind of based on their expectations from how they finished last season. So to start off, I'm going to talk about the Buffalo Bills. They went 11-6 last season, and they won the AFC East. They beat the Steelers in the wild card round, and then lost in the divisional round to the Chiefs. This offseason, they lost their top two wide receivers in Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. They lost their starting center, Mitch Morse, and they lost three of their starting defensive backs from last season in Tre'Davious White, Micah Hyde, and Jordan Poyer. So they did add some pieces. For wide receiver, they signed Curtis Samuel in free agency from the Washington Commanders. They also drafted Keon Coleman with the 33rd overall pick in the draft. And kind of returning from last season, their leading receiver that was an actual receiver coming back from last season was Khalil Shakir, who was fourth on the team in total receiving yards. And then in the secondary, I know they've got Rasul Douglas still there. They drafted Cole Bishop in this year's draft, and they have a couple other pieces that they feel comfortable with there. But I do think that losing that level of experience in the secondary will cause them to take a little step back on defense. They're also kind of aging a little bit. They've got an aging Von Miller that needs to prove that he can stay healthy. He missed a lot of time over the past 2 years. They still have Matt Milano, who's very good, but he's coming off an injury from last season, so he's kind of got to prove that he can stay healthy. And they have kind of pieces, but they need to prove they can stay healthy on the defense. And on offense, yes, they still have Josh Allen, who is arguably a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. They still have James Cook coming back. They still have Dalton Kincaid as a tight end. So they still have some pieces on offense, but the biggest concern for their offense is the fact that they have essentially a whole new receiving core. You don't know how Curtis Samuel is going to perform in this offense, and you don't really know how quickly Keon Coleman as a rookie is going to catch on and be a big part of this offense. Another reason I think that the Bills could take a step back, in addition to you don't know what their offense is going to look like with the new receivers. You don't know what their defense is going to look like, losing some experience, and don't knowing if guys can stay healthy. Is they play in just one of the 2 toughest divisions in football right now, because in the AFC East they have to play the Dolphins twice a year and the Jets twice a year, and the Dolphins also went 11-6 last season, finished second in the division, went to the playoffs, lost in the wild card round. They're expected to return, this year. They still have a very high-powered offense with Tua, with Tyreek Hill, with Jalen Waddle. They should have Devon Achane back to add more explosiveness in the run game with Raheem Mostert. They are returning a pretty good defense, so they did lose a few pieces in Andrew Van Ginkel and Christian Wilkins. But they're still expected to do very well. And you also have the Jets, who are also expected to make the playoffs and possibly make a deep playoff run with Aaron Rodgers as their starting quarterback, hopefully healthy for the whole year. A defense that is one of the top defenses in the league, that even with their subpar quarterback play last season, still managed to win 7 games, and most of the way through the season was still competing for a playoff spot. So not only do the Bills have to worry about what their team is going to look like this year and how their team will perform, they also have two other very good teams in their own division. And on top of that, if they don't win their division, the AFC is going to be kind of hard to get a wild card spot from. That's kind of my reasoning for why I think I'm not gonna say the Bills won't make the playoffs this year. I still think they could win, 9, 10 games, maybe even still win 11 games this year. But 11 games might not be enough to win them the division. And if they do make the playoffs, I don't know how well they will perform or if they'll win a playoff game this year. Moving on, the next thing I want to talk about, the only other team, last team in the AFC I want to talk about is the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns went 11-6 last season. They were second in the AFC North, and then they lost in the wild card round of the playoffs to the Houston Texans. So my biggest question mark around the Cleveland Browns right now is kind of their quarterback play with Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson only started 6 games last season due to injury, and he was very inconsistent in those games. I know the Browns wound up making the playoffs last year, but that was they had 5 different starting quarterbacks, and at the end of the year, Joe Flacco was the one that wound up leading them into the playoffs. Deshaun Watson, in his 6 games, he had times where he looked great, and he started to look like the Deshaun Watson from Houston back in 2019. And then he had games where he was just super inconsistent and looked like a player that hasn't played much football over the past 3 years, because he really hasn't. I don't think he's really played much since 2020, because he sat out all of 2021 with the Texans. Got traded to the Browns in 2022, but was suspended for 11 games, and then last year only started in 6 games. So he hasn't even played a whole season over the past 2 years with Cleveland. I don't really know what he's going to look like. If he can look like that Houston Texans Deshaun Watson, this Cleveland Browns offense is going to do, is going to look spectacular and perform very well. But if he continues to look inconsistent, I really don't know how good that offense is going to look. To kind of go along the inconsistencies in their offense, they're changing offensive coordinators this year from Alex Van Pelt to Ken Dorsey. Ken Dorsey was the offensive coordinator to start the season last year with the Buffalo Bills, and he wound up being fired, I think, 6 weeks into the season. The Bills were 3-3. Their offense looked very inconsistent. They just couldn't really get an identity on offense for what they wanted to be. So I kind of wonder what Cleveland is going to look like with Alex Van Pelt. I know they still have Kevin Stefanski as their head coach, and he likes to be a play caller, but you still have to wonder what that offense is going to look like going away from Alex Van Pelt. Also on offense, you don't really know if Nick Chubb is going to be healthy at running back. He tore his ACL last season in week 2, the second significant ACL tear in the same leg, in the same knee. He did recently post a video of him squatting close to 600 pounds in the gym. So, maybe his knee is still healthy. Maybe his knee is, his rehab is going well and he'll be ready for the start of the season. Still don't really know what he's going to look like once he puts the pads on and once he tries to make football moves. They do have Jerome Ford, who was a very serviceable running back last season, but kind of showed that he can't really carry the load for a whole season. They did have to bring in Kareem Hunt partway through the season to kind of be their goal line back and kind of, their third down pass catching back as well. So you don't really know what the run game's going to look like without Nick Chubb. You don't really know what Deshaun Watson you're going to be getting in terms of how consistent he's going to be. They did have one of the better defenses last season. They had Myles Garrett winning Defensive Player of the Year. They had a bunch of games where their defense was kind of carrying them to wins. But you don't really know how consistent that can be from year to year. So I don't know if you can rely on their defense to look like that for two years in a row, especially in this era of the NFL where offenses seem to evolve quicker than defenses do. Offenses find ways to get around, some of the strengths on defense, and kind of make their offense. Cleveland Browns, they have Myles Garrett on the defensive line. Well, you can kind of move more guys his way, kind of go away from him in the passing game, try to figure out ways to slow down that defense. You don't know what it's going to look like from year to year. They also play in my opinion, the toughest division in all of football in the AFC North. So they have the Ravens, who were the number 1 seed in the AFC last year, made it all the way to the AFC Championship game, and then ultimately lost to the Chiefs. You have the Bengals, who went 9-8 last season, even with Joe Burrow missing games due to injury. And you now have Joe Burrow coming back, hopefully healthy and ready for a full season. And if Joe Burrow can play a full season, the Bengals can make a real big push for the playoffs. And you also have the Steelers, who last season went 10-7 and made the playoffs, but then lost in the wild card to the Bills. I think the Steelers are going to be a better team than people give them credit for. I think are better than people think they're going to be this season. And one thing I talked about in my sleepers team video is that in the AFC North, like, they kind of beat each other up. Like, any team in the AFC North can beat any other team from the AFC North. For example, the Steelers beat the Ravens twice last year, and the Ravens are still the number 1 seed in the AFC. So really anything can happen in that division when they play each other. So again, just like with the Bills, I'm not saying that they can't make the playoffs, but in the AFC, if you don't win your division, you're going to have a really tough time trying to squeak into those last few wild card slots. Because if you don't win your division, the Browns within their own division, they've got the Steelers and the Bengals that can compete for playoffs. Elsewhere in the AFC, I already talked about the Bills, the Jets, the Dolphins. There's also the Colts and the Texans, who I think are going to be very good. I think if the Texans repeat as AFC South champions, the Colts have a very good chance at going to the wild card. If the Colts win the AFC South, the Texans have a really good chance of going as one of the wild card spots. So if the Cleveland Browns kind of underperformed to what they did last season, then they're another team that, if they could, again, win 9-10 games, but could wind up missing the playoffs just based off of how good the AFC as a whole is. I'll move on to my couple of NFC teams that I have. I'm going to start off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers went 9-8 last season. They won the NFC South. They beat the Philadelphia Eagles in the wild card round of the playoffs, and then lost in the divisional round to the Detroit Lions. They didn't really lose a lot of major pieces in terms of players. I think their biggest major loss was really they lost their offensive coordinator Dave Canales, who is now the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. So in this case, again, I wonder what that offense is going to look like with a change of offense and a change of scheme. Even though they do have Baker Mayfield at quarterback, and he's somebody that's kind of used to changing offenses. In 6 years, he's been on 4 different NFL teams. He's kind of he's changed coordinators. Basically almost every year, every other year since he's been in the league. So he's used to adapting to new schemes, but you still don't really know what they're going to look like. You've still got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin on offense. Again, Mike Evans is getting older. You don't know what he's had 1,000 yards every single year. I don't really see any reason why he wouldn't do that again, and why he can't be, a very good wide receiver again this year. But you never know when wide receivers are going to fall off the cliff now that since he is, been in the league for, going on his 12th year. They've still got a very good defense. But honestly, I think the biggest reason that I think they'll take a step back is the unpredictability of the NFC South. So the Buccaneers have won the NFC South since 2020. No, they didn't win in 2020. The Saints won in 2020. They've won every year since 2021. But last year, 9-8. 2022, they were 8-9. Snuck into the playoffs with 3 teams below them that all went 7-10. Last year, they went 9-8. The New Orleans Saints were either 8-9 or 9-8, so they're up there with them. You got the Falcons again that were 7-10, but they've gotten better, I believe, going into this year. In the NFC South, I talked about Atlanta, who I think's gotten better this year. I think New Orleans could also still compete, and have a chance to win that division. So you've got those top 3 teams that'll all kind of be competing for the division. And I don't really think that any team that doesn't win the division in the NFC South is going to make the playoffs. I think the NFC South really only has enough room for one team to make the playoffs, and that's the division winner. And you just don't know. I don't really trust that any team can stay consistent in that division. And and I think that the Falcons can make a push for the playoffs. I think the Saints can make a push for the playoffs. The Buccaneers could just have a few bad games and wind up coming in second in the division and missing the playoffs. Even if they were to go 9-8 again, maybe the Falcons go 10-7 or the Saints go 10-7, or kind of have a tie at the top of the division with teams going 9-8, and the Buccaneers don't wind up getting the tiebreaker. So I think there's a bunch of different factors that could kind of factor into the Buccaneers, underperforming to what they did last season. Now, the final team that I want to talk about is the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys went 10-5 last season. They won the NFC North, and then they lost in the wildcard round to the 7-seed Green Bay Packers. It was the first time that a 7-seed had beaten a 2-seed in the playoffs. So the Dallas Cowboys had said that they were going to go all in free agency. They lost their starting running back. They lost their starting left tackle. They lost some key pieces on defense. And they didn't really do much to address that. On the offensive line, they drafted 2 offensive linemen in Tyler Guyton, who looks like he's going to be the starting left tackle, even though he played right tackle in college. So you got to wonder how he's going to go making that transition. They drafted Cooper Beebe at center. So you could be starting 2 rookies on the offensive line and 2 kind of very important, the 2 most important positions on the offensive line in left tackle and center. Also, they don't have a true number 1 running back. It looks like they're kind of going to have running back by committee because they lost their number 1 rusher from last year, Tony Pollard, and they didn't really bring anybody in to replace them. They signed Ezekiel Elliott back to the team, but he's aging, so you don't really know how he's gonna do. He looked pretty good at the back end of the season last year with New England, but you kind of got to wonder what that's going to look like over a 17-game regular season, if he can kind of hold up for the whole season. Alongside him in the backfield is going to be Rico Dowdle, who looked pretty good last season, but was more of a short yardage back. Was never, never really got very consistent playing time. And then you also have Deuce Vaughn, who's going into his 2nd year in the league, but he only played in 7 games last season as a rookie. So, man, you have real question marks about that backfield. You also have, questions in skill position, because, obviously, you have CeeDee Lamb as the number 1 receiver. You've got Jake Ferguson as the number 1 tight end. But after that, you don't really have a whole lot to go off from. You've got Brandon Cooks there going into his second year, but he didn't really look too great last season. I believe they have Jalen Tolbert, who could be their number 2 option. Don't really know how he's going to look. So, really outside of CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson, that offense in the skill position and the backfield has a lot of question marks, and you just don't know what they're going to do. And one of their bigger losses was not a player, but they lost defensive coordinator Dan Quinn. So Dan Quinn has been their defense coordinator since 2021, and he kind of completely flipped around that defense. In 2020, they were one of the worst defenses in the league. Teams could just kind of throw against them at will. They did not, perform well. They got Dan Quinn in, and he kind of helped turn that defense around. He gave them a new attitude. They just seem to play better under Dan Quinn. They are now losing Dan Quinn. They are getting Trayvon Diggs back from injury, which will, I think, help their secondary a lot. They could bring back Stephon Gilmore, who was there last year but left in but is currently still a free agent. But he's an aging corner that maybe they could bring back and see how he does. But I think just changing defensive schemes and just losing Dan Quinn could have a big effect on that defense, because we don't really know what they're going to look like with a new defensive coordinator and with a new system. Now, I'm not going to say I don't think the Cowboys could make the playoffs. I think they, especially in the NFC, have a real shot at a playoff run. They could win 10 games, maybe 11 games this season, but I don't really see them winning the division. So those are the teams that I think will take a step back this season. I'm sure there's definitely plenty of other teams, that could kind of take a step back and, think of most division winners and be like, if they lost a couple more games, they could, miss the playoffs. If they a few things go wrong, they could miss the playoffs. Something could go wrong. Something were to go wrong. There's a lot of teams that could take steps back if something were to go wrong this season. But those are just the ones that I could think of. If there's any that you guys think will take a step back this upcoming season, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, see ya.